The Shadows Beneath. Chapter 1. A Whisper in the Pines. The Bennetts were an ordinary family from Portland, Oregon. John and Sarah Bennett had decided to take their two children, Emily and Alex, on a camping trip to the remote wilderness of the Appalachian Mountains. They had driven all day and finally arrived at a secluded spot near a dense forest, a perfect place to disconnect from the world and reconnect with each other. As evening approached, they set up camp by a meandering river. The tranquil sound of water flowing over rocks and the rustling of leaves in the gentle breeze made it seem like a paradise. The thick canopy overhead filtered the waning sunlight, casting dappled shadows across the forest floor. "This place is perfect," Sarah said, breathing in the fresh, pine-scented air. "Just what we needed." John nodded, smiling as he watched Emily and Alex chase each other around the campsite. "It's great to get away from the city," he agreed. "No work, no school, just us and nature." They spent the rest of the afternoon setting up their tent, gathering firewood, and exploring the nearby area. Emily found a small clearing filled with wildflowers, while Alex was fascinated by the insects he discovered under rocks and logs. It was a perfect start to their vacation. Chapter 2. Twilight Descent. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of crimson and violet. After dinner, the family decided to take a walk along the riverbank. Emily, a spirited 12-year-old, led the way while 8-year-old Alex trailed behind, fascinated by the fireflies dancing in the twilight. "Stay close, Alex," Sarah called, keeping a watchful eye on her son. "We don't want you getting lost." "Okay, Mom," Alex replied, but his attention was quickly drawn to the water. He wandered closer to the edge, mesmerized by the way the fading light reflected off the surface. Suddenly, Alex stumbled over a protruding root and tumbled into the river. The dark water swallowed him with a swift, silent gulp. John, without a second thought, plunged in after his son, the water closing over his head in an instant. "John!" Sarah screamed, rushing to the river's edge. Emily clung to her mother, tears streaming down her face as they watched the water churn and bubble. Chapter 3. The Surface. Panic-stricken, Sarah and Emily ran along the bank, their eyes frantically searching the water's surface. Moments that felt like hours passed before Alex's small figure emerged, gasping for air. He swam towards the shore, but John was nowhere to be seen. "Alex, thank God!" Sarah cried, reaching out to help her son from the river. But as her hands made contact with his skin, she recoiled in horror. His skin, slick and cold, burned her hands upon contact. She screamed, jerking away as blisters formed where she had touched him, her hands throbbing with searing pain. "Mom, what's wrong?" Emily asked, her voice trembling with fear. Sarah stared at Alex, her mind racing. His eyes, once a warm brown, were now an unnatural swirling black. His expression was distant, devoid of any recognition or warmth that once defined him. "That's not Alex," Sarah whispered, more to herself than to Emily. "It can't be." Chapter 4. The Stranger. Emily stood frozen, staring at her brother. Alex's eyes, once a warm brown, were now an unnatural swirling black. His expression was distant, devoid of any recognition. "Mom, what's wrong with Alex?" Emily's voice trembled. Sarah, cradling her blistered hands, took a step back. "That's not Alex," she whispered. "It can't be." "Mom, it's me," Alex said, his voice eerily calm. "Why are you afraid?" Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. "Stay away from him, Emily," she warned, backing away. "We need to find your father." Alex watched them, his eyes glinting in the dim light. "Daddy's gone," he said, his tone devoid of emotion. "He belongs to the river now." Chapter 5. Descent into night-night had fully fallen, and the forest seemed to close in around them. The temperature dropped sharply, and an eerie silence enveloped the campsite. Alex, or the thing that looked like him, stood by the river, staring into the darkness as if drawn by some unseen force. Desperation clawed at Sarah's mind. She had to find John, to make sense of this nightmare. She told Emily to stay put, then ventured along the riverbank, calling out her husband's name into the inky blackness. "John, John, where are you?" she shouted, her voice echoing through the trees. But there was no response, only the sound of the river flowing steadily on. Chapter 6. Echoes of the Deep. The river responded with a mocking echo. Sarah stumbled over rocks and roots, her flashlight casting long, wavering shadows. She found nothing but the relentless flow of water and the oppressive weight of the night pressing down on her. As she turned back, a voice whispered through the trees, a garbled imitation of John's voice calling her name. She quickened her pace, fear rising with every step, her heart pounding in her chest. "Sarah, Sarah," the voice called, twisted and distorted. "Come to me." Chapter 7. The Gathering Gloom. Returning to the campsite, Sarah found Emily huddled by the fire, clutching a stick defensively. Alex was gone. "He just walked into the woods," Emily said, tears streaming down her face. "He said something about home." Sarah's heart pounded with a frantic rhythm. She knew they couldn't stay there. "We need to leave," she said, helping Emily to her feet, her mind racing for a plan. They packed quickly, shoving what they could into their backpacks. With the flashlight flickering, they started back towards their car, but the forest had transformed. The path they had taken was gone, replaced by an endless maze of trees, their twisted branches clawing at the sky. Chapter 8. The Pursuit. A cold wind blew through the forest, carrying with it the sound of Alex's voice, singing a haunting lullaby. The melody was twisted and wrong, setting their nerves on edge and chilling them to the bone. "Mom, I'm scared," Emily whispered, clutching Sarah's hand tightly. "We're going to be okay," Sarah lied, her voice shaking. "We just need to find the car." But the forest seemed to conspire against them. The trees loomed closer, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching out to snare them. The path twisted and turned, leading them deeper into the darkness. Chapter 9. The True Face. The flashlight died, plunging them into darkness. Sarah fumbled for her matches, but they slipped from her trembling fingers. As she lit one, a figure emerged from the shadows, its outline barely discernible in the dim light. Alex stood before them, but his form shifted and shimmered, revealing a grotesque visage beneath. His eyes glowed with malevolent intent, and a twisted grin spread across his face, far removed from the boy she loved. "Why are you running, Mommy?" the thing asked, its voice a chilling parody of Alex's, dripping with malice. Sarah pushed Emily behind her, her mind racing for a plan. She grabbed a fallen branch, setting it alight with the match. The makeshift torch cast a dim, flickering light, barely holding the darkness at bay, casting eerie shadows that danced and writhed. "You're not my son," Sarah said, her voice shaking but resolute. "What did you do to him? What did you do to John?" The creature laughed, a sound that echoed through the trees. "They belong to the river now, and soon you will too." Chapter 10. The Final Stand. As the fire began to die, the creature lunged. Sarah swung the torch, but it passed through the being as if it were made of smoke. Emily screamed as cold, clammy hands wrapped around her, pulling her towards the darkness. "Run, Emily!" Sarah yelled, but it was too late. The darkness swallowed them both, their screams cut off abruptly. In the final moments before the shadows claimed her, Sarah saw John's face in the water, his eyes wide with terror. The realization hit her with a sickening thud. The river had taken him, and it was coming for her next. Chapter 11. Embrace of Shadows. The campsite was silent the next morning. The only sign of the Bennetts, a few scattered belongings and an extinguished campfire. The river flowed serenely, as if it had never known the terror of the night before. Deep beneath its surface, shadows moved, whispering secrets and waiting for the next family to come close. The Bennetts were gone, but the darkness remained, ever hungry, and the river, with its cold, black depths, flowed on, indifferent to the lives it consumed. Chapter 12. Silent Waters. Years passed, and the story of the Bennetts faded into local legend. The area became known as a place of dark whispers, avoided by all but the most daring or foolish, the tales of the haunted river spreading far and wide. One summer, a group of college students decided to explore the infamous spot, armed with curiosity and bravado. They laughed at the old tales, setting up camp by the same river, oblivious to the warnings of the locals. As night fell, the air grew cold, and the students heard a soft lullaby carried by the wind. The river's surface rippled, and shadows began to move, creeping closer with each passing moment. Chapter 13. The Unseen Watchers. Among the group was Lisa, a history major with a keen interest in folklore. She had heard the stories of the Bennetts and was determined to uncover the truth. As her friends settled in for the night, she ventured down to the riverbank, her flashlight cutting through the gloom. The water was unnaturally still, reflecting the starless sky above. Lisa knelt by the edge, her fingers tracing patterns in the dirt. She had brought along a journal, intending to document her findings. "There's no such thing as ghosts," she muttered to herself, though the oppressive silence seemed to disagree. As she scribbled notes, a ripple disturbed the water's surface. Lisa looked up, her breath catching in her throat. A figure stood on the opposite bank, barely visible in the dim light. It was a boy, his eyes dark and empty. "Who's there?" Lisa called, her voice trembling. The boy said nothing, just stared at her with a gaze that sent chills down her spine. She recognized him from the old photographs she had seen in the library. The missing Bennett boy, Alex. Chapter 14. A Haunting Chorus. Lisa's flashlight flickered, and in that brief moment of darkness, the boy vanished. She stood, her heart racing, and backed away from the river. Returning to the campsite, she found her friends gathered around the fire, their laughter masking the tension she felt. "Guys, I think we should leave," she said, her voice urgent. "Come on, Lisa," one of her friends, Mike, scoffed. "It's just a story to scare tourists." "I'm serious," she insisted. "I saw someone, by the river." Her friends exchanged skeptical glances but agreed to pack up in the morning. They huddled closer to the fire, the night's chill seeping into their bones. Chapter 15. The River's Call. As the night wore on, the forest around them grew eerily quiet. One by one, the students drifted off to sleep, leaving only the crackling fire and the distant sound of the river. Lisa lay awake, her mind racing. She couldn't shake the image of Alex's hollow eyes. The more she thought about it, the more she felt an inexplicable pull towards the water. Unable to resist, she slipped from her sleeping bag and made her way back to the riverbank. The air was colder now, the darkness deeper and more oppressive. "Lisa," a voice whispered from the shadows. "Join us." She turned, searching for the source, but saw nothing. The river's surface rippled again, and she felt a strange compulsion to step closer. Chapter 16. Into the Abyss. Her feet moved of their own accord, carrying her to the edge of the water. The voice grew louder, more insistent. "Join us, Lisa. Be with us forever." She peered into the water and saw faces, John, Sarah, and Emily, staring back at her, their expressions twisted with anguish. Alex stood among them, his eyes locked onto hers. "No," she whispered, trying to pull away. But the water reached out, tendrils of darkness wrapping around her ankles, pulling her in. She screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the night. The last thing she saw before the darkness claimed her was Alex's grin, a cruel mockery of the child he once was. Chapter 17. The Endless Hunger. The students awoke the next morning to find Lisa missing. Panic set in as they searched the area, but there was no sign of her. They packed up hastily, leaving the cursed campsite behind. Back in Portland, the tale of the Bennetts, and now Lisa, became a chilling legend, a warning to those who dared venture too close to the haunted river. Years passed, but the darkness beneath the water remained, ever hungry, ever watchful. The river flowed on, carrying its secrets and its victims, indifferent to the lives it consumed. And in the quiet of the night, if you listen closely, you can still hear the haunting lullaby calling out to those who wander too close to the shadows beneath.